Okay, where we left off on with video number 4 there was dealing with personality and Freud and how that all comes into play there. Uh, we left off kind of talking about the concept there when your id, your ego, and superego is all fighting it out and battling it out as to what your behaviors are going to be and what your decisions are going to be in and dealing with a certain event or topic. You have these defense mechanisms come in. And what happens is sometimes we decide that instead of studying for a test, we're going to go out and go eat pizza. And then we start feeling guilty because your superego starts to wail on you about the fact that you're going to be failing another test and failing the class and your life's going to be over and you're going to get all these depressed ideas. Your ego is trying to console your superego, but it's also trying to get you to understand that you need to get now in and start studying. And then your id's telling you not to worry about it whatsoever. So as you're having these conflicts, you begin to develop these defense mechanisms to reduce the anxieties that you're having and to try to make you feel somewhat better or to rationalize it somehow. So we're going to go through these and kind of outline through them a little bit, and I'll give you an example of some of them to help you out. One of them is rationalization. Now, rationalization is one of the most used types of defense mechanisms that we use, and one of the examples that we kind of get there is this justifiable or plausible excuse that you try to do to deal with your unacceptable behavior. One example is just everybody does it. I had a daughter that, when she was much younger, she would get very upset because her friends would get the latest toy or whatever it could be, and or they got to stay out past a certain time period and we had curfews set on her, and she would always come back and say, well, everybody else gets to stay out late, everybody else gets to have this, everybody else gets to do this. And those are just rationalizations of excuses that you create because she knows better inside that that's not true, but her id is driving her that she wants to have this whatever it might be, the toy or whatever it could be. And so in order for making her feel better about her conflicts she's having, she comes up with this justifiable excuse. We do this as well when it comes to these excuses that you have as a smoker or a drinker, that you're just smoking in order for you to calm down, or you drink in order to make you feel better. Those kinds of rationalizations. The second type is repression. Those are keeping distressing thoughts and feelings buried deep inside. Now, again, repression is something that you have to be careful of. Repression gets into these ideas that you try to hold in your feelings, and maybe you're one of those types of people that does this, that you basically, when you are having a conflict, instead of speaking up and stating what you feel, you just hold on to it and you bury it deep inside. Well, it doesn't get buried deep inside. It gets into your unconscious mind, and then it dwells and it kind of festers in there. And even though you're not concentrating on it, your mind is still dealing with it, and it's releasing inside of your body all of these different chemicals because of the anxieties you're having from this repressed thoughts, and it is affecting you. A third type is projection. Projection is attributing one's own thoughts and feelings buried in your unconscious mind. Now, projection is one that gets very difficult sometimes to get into. Basically, what happens there a lot of times is it's a blaming thing. Okay, you blame everyone else for the problems that you're having. So, you might have an example there where you're not doing very well in a class, and so one of your friends says, hey, why don't you just go in and talk to the teacher? Maybe they can help you out and give you some assistance. And you're like, oh, no, 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 I can't do that. That my teacher hates me. Well, it's not that your teacher hates you at all. It's the fact that you have these buried feelings of resentment and anger towards the class and maybe even towards the teacher because of the grades you're getting. And so you, instead of admitting to those feelings, you want to project them out onto the teacher because it makes you feel better to think, oh, no, they don't like me. Coach doesn't like me. So-and-so doesn't like me. And so that way it makes you feel better because of the feelings you're having. Okay, the fourth one is displacement then, and this is the easiest one to figure out of all of dealing with the defense mechanisms. This is just the physical diverting of emotional feelings from original source. Now again, the key is the physical diverting. That's when you go out and you punch a wall, or you hit your car door, or you kick something, or whatever it may be, you throw your car keys across the room and that kind of thing. And basically it's just you're taking those vent up emotions and you are trying to find some other substitute for what you're wanting to get your frustrations out on. And again, this is something we do quite a bit of, and it is not, none of these are good to do as far as your behaviors and your feelings and your emotions, but it's something we do when it comes to this. All right, the fifth and sixth one is dealing with reaction formation. That's behaving in an exact opposite way of one's true feelings. And again, we do this a lot of times when, for example, you may not like somebody, and but instead of you know, ignoring them or staying away, they come up and start talking to you, and so then you end up acting like, you know, they're your best friend, and you talking to them, and you're trying to show them all kinds of compassion and stuff when actually deep down inside you really don't like this person. Okay, and we have this a lot when it comes to couples, you know, married couples that have been together for a long time, that they actually don't like each other, but in order to ward off the anxieties they're feeling inside of not wanting to be with this person anymore, they intend go to this reaction formation by behaving exactly the opposite way from it. We also see this in little kids, especially, you know, if you can think about when you're a little boy and you had that first crush on a girl. Well, you didn't want to tell them, so instead of you acting nice to them or showing them affection, you know, that little kid goes up and he shoves her, and or, you know, pushes her down, or does something that's more opposite of what their true feelings are. Okay, regressive is just reverting back to an immature behavior. That's a pretty simple one. That's just basically that immaturity. Sometimes we see a lot of kids do this regressive one, even adults, going back to that immature stage where you know, you mimic someone, or those kinds of things when you're in a fight with someone. A lot of times, you know, you go and you just want to leave the room instead of settling out your problem with your roommate or dealing with your husband or spouse. You just take off running. That's that reverting back to the immature pattern of running away from the problem rather than facing it. The rest of these now get into that Freud came up with. These are not used as much, but they are still part of what he calls defense mechanisms, so we'll just kind of briefly run through them. Identification is bolstering your self-esteem by forming imagined or real alliances. A lot of times we do that identification when, especially when you're younger, you know, you identify maybe with a singer or with a movie star or a athlete, and so you want to go buy their shoes, or you want to get their jersey, or you want to get your hair done that way. You want to get a tattoo that they have, that kind of thing, because it just makes you feel about who you are, because you don't want to admit that you're not having, you know, a very good life, or you're having problems, and so you go and you try to sort of become someone else by doing those things. Sublimation is using one's unexpended sexual energy for some creative social purpose. Compensation is changing one's desire goal because of the inability to succeed. Compensation, you guys, you know, you start out at the beginning of the year, you want to get all A's, 4.0 GPA, and that's a nice goal to have. Well, then what happens is you begin to compensate. You begin to change that goal. Well, okay, psychology is a pretty tough class. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle this or not. I don't like this new format, so I'll compensate by maybe just getting a B in that class. So now you drop down to a 3.5 is what your goal is. Well, later on, all of a sudden you realize your English class isn't going so well, so now you're realizing maybe I can get all B's and I'll be fine. It's just where we continually begin to change our desired goal in order to make us feel better about how we're doing on something. Not necessarily that's a horribly bad defense mechanism to do, but it's when you begin to make those different changes just for the fact of changing rather than for attempting or trying. And then the last one is fantasy, which is daydreaming or imagining oneself in a frustrating, getting out of a frustrating behavior. And we again do that a lot when we're having a tough day. We kind of imagine being somewhere else or doing something else or having a different life. And that's, again, not necessarily bad. And with these defense mechanisms, again, it's not that they're a horrible thing to have. We all have them. But it's when you get blocked in with them that's going to cause you a problem. All right, last thing we're going to talk about then in your notes, dealing with Freud and dealing with psychoanalytical theory, and this is one of his last theories, is dealing with what's called the psychosexual stages. And here what Freud talks about is when you develop that personality that we have, and we get into this, what happens a lot of times is as we're developing this early personality, and again, remember, personalities, according to Freud, start out very, very young, and they go up to about the age of 10, 12, 13, and that is your personality according to Freud. You don't get to change it. You don't get to manipulate it later on in life. Your personality is locked. What he says happens as we go through these stages of our development of our personality, where our id, ego, and superego is having these battles going on. The first stage is the oral stage. It's from birth to 18 months. Basically, all you're doing at this time is sucking, biting, chewing, as a baby, and you're totally dependent upon mom. During this period of time that you're in this oral stage, according to Freud, what happens a lot is we get into this component where we may not be able to get over the idea of the chewing, the sucking, or biting. And so if we don't successfully get through this stage, then according to Freud, we get stuck in it. And this is what he terms as called a fixation. And then what happens later on in life, for example, is if you're not able to get through this stage very well of the sucking, biting, and chewing, then you continue to have that fixation later on in life. So you may be one of those that bites the side of your mouth or bites your fingernails. You may constantly have to have something in your mouth, and so that's why a lot of people take up smoking. They say it makes them feel better. Well, according to Freud, it's because during this stage, the oral stage, they were not able to get through that successful stage of being able to have that pacifier removed from their mouth successfully, and so they still have this fixation on wanting it. And so then later when they grow up, they don't use a pacifier. Now they use a cigarette to pacify them. A lot of times you'll also notice if you are having a difficult day or you're having a problem to making a decision, you'll stick something in your mouth like a pen or something like that, because again, it pacifies us. And so what Freud's saying there is you haven't successfully gone through that stage because if you had some problem with it, your parents, as they were raising you from birth to 18 months, they took you off the bottle too soon, they took your pacifier way too soon, or they allowed you to have it for too long, and it caused these fixations. Okay, the second one is anal. This goes from 18 months to 3 years. Basically, it's the pleasure of using your bladder. You're no longer dependent on mom, so now you're much more independent-minded and controlling. The problem with the anal stage a lot of times we get into is that you get, again, this fixation that you may not want. Mom helping you control your bladder by getting you to learn to go to the bathroom. You want to just go when you want to go. And so you want to have complete independence rather than having any type of control on it, and you become what's known as anal expulsive or anal retentive. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about those as we get through the last part of the notes here. All right, the third stage is the phallic stage, and this is from years 3 to 6, and this is when basically you see those children beginning to be more exploration with their bodies, especially with their genitals. Girls begin to realize that, when they happen to see Bubby or their brother or whatever, and they're taking a bath, and maybe they see them, and then they notice, wait a minute, they have something I don't have. They begin to realize that their body's a little bit different. Those kinds of things begin to happen, and this is where that whole Oedipus complex comes in, where girls begin to have that attraction towards their fathers, and boys begin to have those attractions toward their mothers. And again, remember, it's not a sexual thing, it's not a perverted thing about Freud's ideas. It was dealing with this concept of the connection, the mental connection. Okay, and this is the development of your personality it's developing into. So you need to have that ability to have that connection with your opposite sex parent. And it's during this stage that this comes into play here. And when that doesn't happen, it can become again, one of those fixations that you have. And so a little girl whose daddy's not around because of the divorce and only mommy's raising her, she then could have a fixation later on in life when she becomes a young adult where she never had that connection to her father to make that personality development. And so what happens is then as a young adult, that girl goes through several different relationships, never being able to find that one special relationship with that person. Same thing with the guy. Doesn't have that connection with the mother, and so as a result of that, when they become older, they tend to be a lot more uncaring towards women. They can be a lot more domineering towards women because of that. They may not trust women very much because of the fact that they didn't ever have that connection. So there's a lot of, according to Freud, a lot of those kinds of issues that develops that can cause a lot of anxieties, stresses, and other things later on in life that is developed because of these problems that you had back in the phallic stage. All right, the last two stages is the latency stage. And then the genital stage, which should be number 5 actually, the latency stage then for boys, we want to be hanging around boys now. So during this period of time, you really don't see, and that's why it's called latency, because you don't see the opposite sex attractions anymore. For boys, it tends to typically go between ages up to 6, 7, 8, 9. Girls going up to a little bit higher to 10, 11, 12. And basically during this time, you see, especially if you go to school and watch the elementary grades, you see a lot of the boys hanging out. They hang out with dad. They do man things or men things. Typically, that stereotypical idea. And girls doing, things with girls. Then the last stage is the genital, and this is when puberty kicks in. This is for both boys and girls begin to have these sexual attractions. It's not just the guys that have the perverted sexual fantasies and those kind of things, and gets into the concepts of masturbation and those kind of things, which is all part of a healthy development of the human psyche and the human growth. But girls as well get into this as well. And again, you can get into a fixation here. And this gets into a problem in the genital stage when this is getting into that age for boys into their lower teens, the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 age. And if they're not able to deal with the concepts about sex and the ideas about sex, and if they're not taught about the ideas of sex, they can get into that fixation where it can cause them a lot of later developmental problems when they are fixated on the concept of sex. And so they become perverts, older in life, where they're constantly having to be watching sexual videos and buying things, and they never can build that strong relationship with the opposite sex partner. They end up having affairs later on and all kinds of things. Girls, same thing. If they are blocked from being able to have any of these feelings or attractions or ideas and not be able to deal with their changes with their body and the emotions they're having, they can become very frigid later on in life and very difficult for them to have sexual relationships with men and husbands and those kind of things, and it can cause them all kinds of problems too. So this fixation is a big part of Freud's theory, dealing with the inability to satisfy or prolong the enjoyment. And we're going to get a lot more into this when we kind of get into back in class. All right, the last thing now that you want to do is, when you get done with this video and you kind of got the notes filled out, is you're going to want to go back into ECOLLEGE. There is, in the Dropbox area, there's going to be a review assignment over Freud and over the reading of the Chapter 11. You need to get into the Dropbox then, find that assignment, complete it, and then you will submit it through the Dropbox to me for grading. Also in class, we will be doing some reviewing over this material, and then you'll be taking a quiz over all of this material that we've covered so far in the notes. So that's the next big things you want to kind of be getting ready for and getting into then. All right.